To start, your short film Arlo and the Sea is on the festival circuit right now. It's being incredibly well received. How did this partnership with Damien first come about, and what inspired this short form narrative?
Yeah, so Damien and I met like years ago at a just short film festival essentially. It was like an awards night called the like Australian Screen Industry Network Awards. Met there, got introduced to him by another very like supportive person in the film industry to me, Brenda, and she, introduced me to Damien. We caught up for a coffee and then we were like just talking ever since. Yeah, and then we eventually just like a couple of years later reconvened, went out for a coffee, and then that's how the idea for the film was born.
Your character goes through such a wave of emotions after having his heart broken and really needs to discover self love again. And you brought so much nuance to that journey. As an actor, how did you create the space for yourself to tackle that vulnerability without the use of dialogue?
So that was actually one of the most like challenging parts of the film for the actual like role itself. It was the first time I headed into a lead role, so there was
Yeah.
like a lot of pressure that I put on myself to make sure that, obviously, due to the nature of the part as well, there's so much that you have to try and like just nail in order to really like sell people what you're feeling. Luckily, I was like kind of in a very similar headspace at the time, so that did help. But essentially, like with no dialogue or being able to like talk about how you feel, it was all about just internalizing all the emotions and then like the struggles he was going through and just everything that was happening inside of his head. Like there's all of these little things I had to try and focus on, whether it's like, him pressing his lips up together because he's thinking about a kiss, and just things like that where I just wanted everything to be as subtle as possible so that when you're watching it as an audience member, it's not like I'm trying to like overstate how the character is feeling. It's more just so you could just see it without kind of me overtly doing it. That was a very challenging part. In terms of nailing that, but I think we got there. I think we got there.
Yeah, you definitely did. I think it's such a challenging role when you don't have the use of dialogue, which I feel like is such a big mechanism for actors to express themselves. And like you're saying, this is your first time leading a film. Did anything surprise you about the experience? What was the biggest takeaway?
That is a good question. This was such like a free experience in terms of just the filmmaking process. So it didn't work like any other film that I've worked on before. It was a very much so like collaborative time between me and Damien. And then stepping into the lead role, it was just really nice because it was just what I kind of had in mind for the character and then what Damien had in mind for the character. And we just discussed it, we worked everything out. And then eventually when it came to shooting it, I think I was just surprised in terms of how much I was able to just put myself into the role. And that was really cool. And it's um it's a lot different because you really have to try and make every single moment engaging, even when theoretically nothing is happening. So that was also a tricky one, and that caught me off guard because it's a lot more pressure.
Yeah, you're also a multifaceted storyteller. In addition to the work that you've done on screen, you've also written, produced, and edited. How have those experiences behind the camera impacted your work as an actor and vice versa, especially on a project like this where you're wearing multiple hats and editing your own performance?
Yeah. All right. So this one's actually crazy because yeah, I stepped into this film like going in it from a acting perspective and then went into doing like the cinematography with Damon, working on all the shots. And then, I came to the editing suite. I had my entire performance recorded out to me. So I got very sick of seeing myself very quickly and then having to stitch everything together. Um, it was completely different because I think overall I enjoyed it because it allowed me to kind of look at the entire film from like a higher bird's eye view almost. I could kind
Mm.
of see where everything fit together. So yeah, I did my performance. I had no idea what that looked like at the time up until it got into the editing suite. And I was like, all right, cool. Like now I'm figuring out everything that I tried to do um with the like story beats and how he was feeling and then like his, roller coaster of emotions. I had to try and figure out how that all fit in the editing suite. And that was just something I've never done before because now you're looking at yourself critically, being like, all right, what's going to work best? Um, And then yeah, and then when it comes to coloring the film as well, that was an interesting one because I came up with a bunch of color theories for each
Mhm.
shot so you can like refer back to them. And yeah, so it kind of allowed me to look at it holistically, and that was like a really sick part of the journey. Like I enjoyed that a lot.
Perfect segue with the coloring, but we're living in such an exciting time in this industry where we have storytellers taking their careers into their own hands and creating their own content. And we have short films like this. I was really shocked when the credits were rolling that it was shot on an iPhone. It's a testament to the work that you did with the cinematography and the coloring, which makes it feel so cinematic. What were some of those earlier conversations and considerations that you had with Damien about how to really lean in on the visuals and make it more grander in scale?
That was yeah. So we initially were like, all right, how can we make this film as cheap as possible, like, but still kind of get that cinematic feeling with it, like from the start. Because I was just like, all right, we can make a film on an iPhone, no worries. But then it's a question of like, I wasn't, and Damien wasn't either. We weren't going into the film being like, all right, this is gonna look like it was shot on an iPhone. The entire point from the beginning was, all right, we're gonna try and make this film look as cinematic as possible, so that we're not limiting ourselves in terms of like, there's a stigma behind shooting stuff on iPhones. I think
Yeah.
especially if you look at like a lot of the younger people in the film industry, they're like, what are you doing shooting on an iPhone? And I was like the same. I genuinely went into this film thinking like, as if we're about to shoot this on an iPhone, like this is not a good idea. But I was just looking at all the things you can do with an iPhone. Like, there's so many different facets that goes into it, and it's obviously a lot simpler than using like a giant, RE.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so me and Damien were discussing it. We literally just had to make sure that each shot was just lit naturally well. So that was like location scouting. That was really important because iPhones do really good in some conditions and really poorly in others. So that was a very important thing that we were keeping track on. And then color theory was like massive going into the film, making sure that all the clothing and all the locations all were like able to be graded, so that you kind of hide the aesthetic of like the iPhone shots, so like
Mm.
it's the default settings, because I'm pretty sure most photos you can be like, oh yeah, it's shot on an iPhone, or that's shot on a Samsung, because they've got very different ways of capturing things. So then it was about taking that original footage and then kind of lying about it, being like, yeah, no, this was shot on this. So even when it comes to like adding a little bit of grain, because like to make it less crispy, make it a little bit more
Mm.
gritty, that was all stuff that I was looking at to try and cover up the fact that it was shot on an iPhone.
You definitely accomplished that. Damien wrote and directed this. How different is that experience when the person who's created this universe and these characters is also at the helm directing?
I think it was bloody brilliant, to be honest, because he started off with a very strong script to begin with. I like loved the concept initially, and then the more we fleshed it out, the more we developed it, the more we kind of brought our own personal experiences into the film. So um, when we were like actually shooting these scenes between Finn and Arlo, and we were delving into like all these emotions afterwards, and that he had a very clear understanding about like where he wanted to go with the characters, and then it was just about figuring out that ending. So him having written Arlo, he had a very clear direction, I think, in his head where he wanted to go, but he still never limited me in terms of like taking it our own way. So we kind of met in the middle, and I think it really worked out because I think the performance came out a lot more genuine with how he was coaching it, and how
Mm.
he was kind of nurturing it. And I think that's just because he related to Arlo and I related to Arlo in like very similar ways. So it was just important trying to like bring that performance out in a true way. And then, yeah, he guided that beautifully.
You and Paris have such great chemistry on screen. I think he was only part of the filming experience for a very short time. How were you able to build that bond so quickly? And was there a moment while you were filming when you realized you had that bond necessary to bring this dynamic to life?
Yeah, so that was we obviously, so we went into the film. It was written in about 2 weeks, and then we had like a week to film it. So we were like, all right, this has to like pretty much go perfectly straight away. And then we spoke to Paris. He was like, yeah, I'm down to come. He only had one day to give us, so we ended up shooting all of the scenes with Paris in literally a day. And there's a lot that like didn't make it into the film. There's a lot that did.
Mm.
We kind of when it came to the editing process of that, it was all about like finding those moments that really did work. And a lot of the times I found that like the moments of more just candid in between takes almost were the ones that were getting used. But as soon as like Paris came to the day on set, we basically, me and him sat down and we spoke about like just the relationship is like between these two from beginning to, you know, where it's at now, and then just how it kind of fell apart or how it came to be and everything. We fleshed it all out, you know, and then I think that allowed us to really understand where both of the characters were coming from. Because we spoke about situationships and like, you know, today's kind of landscape of like going out and seeing people and then people being
Mm.
in it just for themselves. And they're not really interested in finding out anything about anyone. It's more just like sex orientated. So there was a lot of like these deep things that we were talking about where it's kind of just an impossible landscape to navigate, especially you know, in certain situations. So that all aided in just coming into the performance from both of our perspectives with like a lot of preemptive knowledge. And then when we came to shooting, we pretty much had just natural, we just got along, we just got on. So we just had like a good chemistry to start off with. And I think all that together, like I'm so grateful it was him because it was just such an easy, like, um, yeah, it was just no complaints about it at all. Had the best time in terms of working with him.
That's so smart to use those candid moments. I feel like it's so vulnerable to be an actor on screen. And with this being your debut as a lead, was there a scene in particular that you're really excited for audiences to see?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, Honestly, I think for me, in terms of the scene that I'm like most excited for everyone to see, honestly, man, it's got to be either the ending, um, in terms of just the actual scene with the waves at the
Hmm.
beach. I think that one's definitely that one's an interesting one because I held that shot for as long as I could in the editing suite for like multitude of like different reasons. And then I think another one, definitely just anything to do with the bathtub. That's why we've promoted it very much so in like the ad everything like that is just um I think you get a lot of different emotions from these two things, and like just tying the water with the water, you know, the bathtub,
Hmm.
claustrophobic kind of, um, you know, location. Then you contrast that with like this giant open beach, and how those two work together. I think that's probably the most captivating part of the film, and just what that means symbolically as well. Yeah, I found that pretty moving when like I saw it in the final because like
Yeah.
Damien wrote the ending, and I was like, oh, he's done it again. Like it was brilliant. So yeah, that was definitely yeah.
That final scene is really powerful. I think there's something really beautiful about the stillness and the subtlety in that scene. And like I was saying earlier, the film has been incredibly well received on the festival circuit. What do you hope audiences take away when they see it? And it also tackles so many universal themes. Is there one in particular that resonated with you?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that like I really going into the film, this was like what I was really like passionate about with it. And then also I found would be the most impactful to people. So it was the entire idea of, you know, it's a post love story. You've got these two people and they met up, but there's like clearly some kind of misalignment of intent between
Mm,
them in their, excuse me, them in their relationship. So from the way that it was always seen is like one of them was never really in it. And I'm pretty sure if you've seen the film, you know which one's it,
yeah,
like which one it is. And I just wanted the message, and Damien, when he wrote that message, was like beautiful, but it's just the notion of like you will always find someone again. Like there's always going to be someone that comes along.
yeah.
And if you're too busy, you know, closing yourself off, keeping your walls up, you know, staying in the bathtub and basically just isolating yourself in like a place of solitude because you're afraid of getting hurt, then all these wonderful things that come along with the pain don't come. So it's kind of just being open to the human experience of love and the good and the bad that comes with it. So, you know, love is inevitable, but that, you know, yeah, it comes along to those who are open to it as opposed to those who are closed
Mhm.
off, which is something that like I had to learn because there's definitely points where I've been in relationships and been like, this isn't working out at all. Like, put all my walls up next time you meet someone and they're
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, like tell me something about yourself. And it's like my favorite color is blue, like, and then that's about as much as you can give. And then also just the way that the film tackles LGBT representation, because we were very open from the start in terms of this film, we wanted to not have that be the focus. It's
Yeah.
not like a coming out story because that's been done before and it's been done brilliantly before. So it's definitely it's a story about two people that are in a relationship and it happens to be same sex. Which I thought was like a beautiful notion because there's too many times it's made such a big deal.
Yeah.
And then, I feel like that's kind of counterintuitive. If you're trying to be progressive with it, I think it needs to just be normalized. Don't comment on it. Like, it just is what it is. And so I think that was handled beautifully by Damien in the film because it's such a beautiful love story that, was tragically, disrupted, but it never goes into the LGBT aspects
Yeah.
of it in like a overt way.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the next step in like the evolution of representation where we can have queer storylines and characters and the focal point isn't about their coming out experience or that trauma and they can just exist in a narrative as beautiful as this. So often when you're releasing and working on a short film, it's a proof of concept. Have there been any earlier conversations with Damien about potentially extending this out to a full-length feature?
There have definitely been conversations about it. Very like, optimistic conversations. And I think it would be sick as a feature film concept. I think it's a character study in a way. So I'm sure if it came like to becoming a feature, it would be a character study on Arlo, and then maybe you can even delve into like a series of flashbacks or something along those
Hmm.
lines where like by it explores Finn and Arlo's relationship. And then I think that could also just really flesh the character out more because I think that was one thing that was also difficult with the performance aspect of it because you had to kind of indicate that there was this huge history there
Yeah.
that no one in the film really sees. Like there's a couple of short snippets and then the rest of it is just, this sad dude is just like, yeah, that was sucky. So I think that was difficult, but in a feature film, you can really flesh all of that out. You can flesh his journey from just like being at the absolute rock bottom to finally rising up again. You can flesh all that out really beautifully. Even like you can bring his family into it, his friends, like all of that kind of stuff, and then it could be like a beautiful coming of age story. So I would be like so down. I think yeah, it could be sick if it was done well and done right, which
Yeah.
I trust that you would be able to smash that out.
One final question for you. Outside of this project, what's next for you? And you're such an exciting voice in this industry. Is there a dream role that you would love to bring to life in the near future?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Look, we'll have to see how next year goes. The strikes have just ended, so like in terms of, I'm pretty sure every actor's got this issue where it's just like nothing is coming through. But yeah, so we'll see how next year goes. But in terms of like a dream role, man, I would just love to be a part of like any kind of coming of age kind of story that just tackles deep themes of like
Mm.
youth. Because I think I'm very just passionate about the way that time has changed the way youth has been raised. I don't know. I think my favorite film personally is Stand By Me. So I like grew up watching that, and I think it's such a beautiful representation of like kids growing up into their teenage years. But like, yeah, I would love to do something like that. Obviously, older demographic, but it would just be such a different kind of film if
Mhm.
you were to make it today because every kid
Yeah.
is completely different and we live in a completely different landscape. Like everything is kind of messed up. So I think I would just love to do something like that. That would be really cool.